Well, does Tylenol cause autism? That was the big announcement yesterday made by Trump with RFK Jr. standing by his side. Watch this.
Tylenol during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary. That's, for instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol, but it'll be very sparingly. It can be something that's very dangerous to the woman's health. In other words, a fever that's very, very dangerous, and ideally a doctor's decision, because I think you shouldn't take it. And you shouldn't take it during the entire pregnancy. They may tell you that toward the end of the pregnancy, you shouldn't take it during the entire. And you shouldn't give the child the Tylenol every time he's born and he goes and has a shot. You shouldn't give a Tylenol to that child. All pregnant women should talk to their doctors for more information about limiting the use of this medication while pregnant. So ideally, you don't take it at all. But if you can't tough it out, if there's a problem, you're going to end up doing it.
Okay. This announcement has caused a bit of a civil war inside the Baja movement, with many saying this is a cop-out to protect big pharma vaccine makers. But Trump did, in fact, mention vaccine, though he does stop short of blaming autism on them.
You know, it's artificially induced. It's not like something that when you go from all of those, healthy babies to a point where I don't even know structurally if a country can afford it. And that's the least of the problems. To have families destroyed over this is just so terrible. I also, and we've already done this, we want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine. The MMR, I think, should be taken separately. This is based on what I feel the mumps, measles, and the three should be taken separately. And it seems to be that when you mix them, there could be a problem. So there's no downside in taking them separately. In fact, they think it's better, so let it be separate. The chicken pox is already separate, because when that got mixed in, I guess they made it for a while, it really was bad. So they make chicken pox. Individually, they're okay. When you mix them, something maybe happens. So there's no downside in doing it. It's not like, if you do it, bad things. No, it's only good side. And it may not have that much of an impact, but it may have a big impact. So let those be taken separately. And then hepatitis B is sexually transmitted. There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B. So I would say wait till the baby is 12 years old and formed and take hepatitis B. And I think if you do those things, it's going to be a whole different, it's going to be a revolution in a positive sense in the country.
Okay. Well, what is the truth behind the cause of autism? Joining us now is Dr. Brian Hooker. He is the Senior Director of Science and Research at Children's Health Defense. Dr. Hooker co-authored with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the New York Times bestselling book, Vax Unvax, Let the Science Speak. Dr. Hooker has written over 70 science and engineering papers, which have been published in internationally recognized peer-reviewed journals. He has been active in vaccine safety since 2001 and has a son with autism. Dr. Brian Hooker, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here again.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. It's always great to be here. Always good to see you.
I'm really excited to get your opinion on this. I don't know. There's online, I'm seeing controversy. A lot of people in the MAHA movement agree with this. Tylenol is potentially causing autism. Others are saying, and some people have said, look, my kids are, I read one post where a guy says, my kids are totally unvaccinated. Yet one of them has one of them has autism, and my wife did take Tylenol while she was
Right.
pregnant, and so maybe there's something to this. Others are saying absolutely not. This is just skirting around the real issue, which is vaccines. Really curious to get your opinion on this. What do you think of this?
Well, life is not so simple that you can say it's one thing or the other thing or the other thing. I mean, so much of toxicity and looking at toxins are more, what toxic soup are we being exposed to? And so, Tylenol, I've seen very, very compelling evidence regarding Tylenol, especially in the presence of something else that causes what we know medically as oxidative stress. And so, when you have Tylenol as an additive that actually can become toxic when it enters into brain tissue, especially in individuals that have a lot of oxidative stress, then yeah, the evidence is very, very compelling that Tylenol plus vaccines or Tylenol plus another type of environmental stressor can lead to autism, can lead to developmental delays, and can also lead to ADHD. And so, I wanted to really look at this seriously. I'm late to the party. The evidence around Tylenol and essentially acetaminophen being toxic and related to the autism epidemic has been around since 2008.
Hmm.
I've really known about this, in earnest for the past 2 years. I've done a deep dive on it. I've worked with the primary researcher who's doing the work, Dr. William Parker from the University of North Carolina. And I really think that he's onto something, but I want us all to be very, very careful because Tylenol is necessary. It is for a lot of autism. It's a necessary part of the equation, but it's not sufficient. You need something else. You need something else that is taking away your reserves of detoxification capacity that will then cause Tylenol then to become toxic at the right age group. It's really more of a risk perinatally, like early after birth, first month of life is the biggest risk window, but definitely a risk prenatally and then definitely a risk postnatally.
Yeah, so you're saying that because there's a lot of people online, of course, right now that are debating this, and when I'm watching mainstream news today, and they're saying,
Right.
I took Tylenol with my kids, and my kids are fine; they don't have autism. So
Mhm.
Tylenol's not causing autism because my kids are okay. But you're saying, and what some other experts I'm hearing are saying, is that it's not just the Tylenol. It's not, and we should
Right.
be clear, acetaminophen, right? It's not
Yeah.
Tylenol, the brand that is causing this. It's acetaminophen
Correct.
specifically that we're talking about, right? So,
The
um,
compound or the molecule acetaminophen. Yes.
acetaminophen. Okay. So, you're saying, and what the research says is that acetaminophen mixed with something else, it's some other factor. So not everybody is susceptible to this. Not
Right.
everybody would. So some pregnant women could absolutely take it and not have any risk of their kid developing autism. But how would you even know what is that other thing, the other equation? Is there a pinpoint on that?
Well, I think that anything that would be an environmental stressor or contaminant, specifically vaccines are great contaminants. I mean, you don't have a better exposure mechanism than injecting something and then taking up 100% of the aluminum or the mercury or the formaldehyde or the polysorbate 80 or the live viruses, all that have oxidative stress associated with them. But there's other ways that you can get contamination. You can breathe in mercury from coal-fired power plants. You can get pesticides or herbicides from spraying of crops or even from consuming food. And so those are stressors that are also a necessary part of the equation. If you really break it down, I mean, we've heard of the fire triangle. Remember, Sparky the magic dog, and the fireman comes to your third grade class, and they talk about oxygen, they talk about an ignition source, and they talk about fuel. That's the fire triangle: oxygen, ignition source, and fuel. Those three things cause fire. Well, a great triune equation for autism would be genetic susceptibility, oxidative stressor, whether it's vaccines, whether it's other components, and then some other component that's highly toxic like Tylenol. So you need those three things in play in order to get over the edge where you're getting some type of developmental issue, some type of actual brain tissue neurological damage, which has been shown in autism. And so, to argue that it's one thing or another is really not a scientific argument, because it does take multiple components in order to push these kids over the edge where they get an autism diagnosis, where they get an ADHD diagnosis.
Okay. Is there any way for somebody to find out if they are genetically susceptible?
Absolutely. The genetic susceptibility tests really were in the research phase when my son initially got diagnosed. And I'll never forget, he was a part of a research study in 2004, and they were looking at genes that were specific to two chemical pathways called methylation and sulfation. Those are really primarily detoxification pathways of, standard environmental toxicants that get into human bodies. And the researcher that was doing the study literally called me on the phone. I didn't know her from Sikkim. I just saw this number, and it was from the university that was doing the research. And she said, "Oh, your son's like the least methylated child in our entire study." I'm like, "Is that good or bad?" And she said, "Well, no, that's really bad." And I said, "Well, can I get like a consolation prize or something? You're so excited on the phone." But no, now we have these studies that are around these pathways, detoxification pathways. You can go to Intellex DNA and you can get a comprehensive panel. You can go to even some of the standard ones like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA. You can get medical panels that will show you, where you are in terms of detoxification. I caution people that you should have somebody that's a geneticist that understands what they're looking at. You don't want to just recipe it, and do this on your own. But certainly you can look at environmental toxicants and the ability to detoxify things like drugs, vaccines, other components, pesticides, herbicides, airborne contaminants, and you can get a genetic run-up to see where you are in terms of susceptibility. Absolutely.
So what you're looking for if you get one of these tests is your ability to detoxify.
Correct. And there are a lot of different pathways that are involved in detoxification. The primary pathways involve what are called methylation. Methylation is a chemical process by which toxicants can be tagged, so they can be identified by the body. And another way that toxicants are tagged are with sulfur, so it's called sulfation. And so those are the main pathways.
When the researcher called you and said your son is the least methylated, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
No, it's perfect.
Oh, that means he's not detoxing.
Correct. That he was not detoxing. And, it was another nail in the coffin. We had determined that vaccines were really the cause of my son's regression. And by the way, it was the first time when he regressed from vaccines, it was the first time we had ever used baby Tylenol. Because he was running a fever, he had an ear infection, he was getting vaccinated. And I was talking to my wife, and my wife said, "Oh no, we did not use Tylenol. Tylenol scared the crap out of me when my son was a baby. It wasn't until after he was 1 year old." And our own anecdotal personal story was that the first time that we used Tylenol, and we were rotating it with baby aspirin because my son was fevering, that's when he regressed into autism.
Interesting. So you do think it had something to do with it?
Oh, I'm sure.
Wow.
Looking at the evidence, looking at what was happening prior to his autistic regression, there were developmental cues that things were wrong. But really to have that sort of cataclysmic regression, it did take all the components in the autism triangle. He was genetically loaded. He had the toxicants from mercury, aluminum from his vaccines. You added the Tylenol into it. It was a perfect storm.
Wow. The ignition, right? The
Yeah,
light, it lit the fire. It lit the fire.
exactly.
What is causing then the rise in autism? I mean, people must have been using Tylenol decades ago. So what do you think it is that's because we are seeing higher rates, and some will argue, well, we're just better at diagnosing.
Well, I think that the advent of the vaccination schedule expanding so much, once they lifted liability from the vaccine manufacturers, the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, then the vaccine schedule expanded because there was no liability. And so each one of these vaccines, as it entered into the market, was a $1 billion a year sales proposition for the
Mm,
vaccine manufacturer. And so, of course, it expanded. Now we have over 80 different vaccines in the schedule between ages 0 and 18 years. So that has expanded. And with that has expanded the use of over-the-counter medications like Tylenol,
mm,
like acetaminophen. Now, acetaminophen isn't the only way that you can spark, it's not the only ignition source.
yeah,
It's a very, very good and effective ignition source, but there are other ways to get autism, and there are other types of autisms. I think that as this pans out, as these things break down, we're going to know better, what toxicants, what contaminants cause what different types of autism. I mean, you see these kids present very, very differently. Like my son is nonverbal. He cannot speak. He does not have and he has whole body dyspraxia, but he's very, very intelligent. Now that we can communicate with him, then that is one phenotype of autism that we're seeing. We're also seeing kids that can communicate, but have developmental delays and have developmental issues in terms of their, IQ or whatever you want to
right,
call it. And
right.
so the more that we know about this, the more that we can start to unravel this and understand it better.
Is it a myth or is it true that autistic kids are like geniuses in some way? I mean, because then how do we account for that? Why is it that their brains seem to? Because I could understand if it was like, okay, this toxin mixed with this like ignition source mixed with this genetic, and then some kids get autism, and that to me would indicate like brain dysfunction, like something got in the way of the formation of the brain developing properly, or something's in the way. That would indicate in my mind, logically it would mean less intelligent. But for some reason, a lot of these autistic kids are more intelligent in certain areas, whether it be math or language or the ability to memorize. And so what do you think that is? Or is that just a myth?
I don't think it's a myth. I think that I know some autistic adults that are highly intelligent, that have the inability to communicate using speech. And they're dynamite. They're very, very intelligent. I think that, bodies are wonderful. If you look at the human body and you look at the adaptability of the human body, it is absolutely amazing. And I think that in some ways that these individuals are adapting to, their dysfunction, whatever it
Mm,
is. My son, we call it whole body apraxia. He's basically trapped in his body, and things like lifting up a fork elude him, but he's doing calculus, like how is that possible? But I think that, the body adapts, it changes. And so therefore it's finding a way to survive. It's finding a
interesting.
way to overcome. And also the brain's very, very complex and very, very large. Different contaminants can lodge in different parts of the brain, and it can cause different types of dysfunctions and disabilities.
Okay, so it kind of it sort of makes sense to me that,
Right.
some people will say that if one of their senses is not very great, like for me, my eyesight is not great, but my hearing is like really fantastic. It's like,
Right.
yeah, outrageously good hearing. But um, so like the body will compensate. So you're saying that maybe if these contaminants get into the brain and the brain can't form in that spot, so the brain's inhibited and it can't form there, then the brain's like, well, I still have energy. I need something to do. So it maybe goes and forms a different part of the brain that maybe those who don't have the contaminant don't. The brain would just develop in a more normal way. Something like that? Do you think?
I think you should be one of my science students because that really sums it up. that, is the adaptability. And so one portion of the brain is compromised, or maybe one portion of neural connectivity. A lot of these kids with autism, it's not necessarily that, they have, specific types of brain damage, but their connectivity in the brain has been thrown off.
Yeah.
And so, with my son, he's got problems with his central nervous system talking to his peripheral nervous system, with his fingertips and with his toes, and, with his arms and legs and his mouth. But other children do have, they don't have the problem, like, oh, they can eat with utensils or whatever, but maybe they haven't developed necessarily the portion of the brain that is really, really good at articulating intelligence or whatever.
Right. Right.
What we value in society is intelligence.
Yeah. So their brain just picked up and said, well, we got to put this somewhere. So let's go develop
Exactly.
this side over here and see what happens. And then we end up with these like mathematical geniuses and kids that can memorize everything, but that, yeah, they can't communicate very well. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. Everybody gets a hit. I mean, these are environmental contaminants. They lodge and they go into different portions of the brain. But it's not necessarily the same. I've met
yeah.
so many different kids on the quote unquote autism spectrum, and they each present uniquely in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense if the brain is just trying to figure out where to put its energy to develop. And then it might, each brain's going to be a little different.
Right.
And each level of contamination that's inhibiting the development of one certain spot would be different too. I mean, some would have it more pronounced than others. So, um, okay. So it's this combo, and you think it's like a three-part combo that creates autism.
I do. I think that the more contaminants, the more things that we're exposed to now, especially with the expansion of the vaccination schedule, with the advent of so many GM crops that are being sprayed with so many pesticides and herbicides, I think that our toxic level is increasing,
Okay.
and so the genetic susceptibility, the threshold is lower. My
Yeah.
son was a genetic anomaly back when he was diagnosed with autism in 1999. And I did get the phone call from Jill James, bless her heart, Dr. Jill James from the University of Arkansas Medical School, talking about how unique my son's genotype was. But I think that as that toxic load increases, then more and more people then become, maybe they're not as genetically susceptible, but we're increasing their toxic load, so
Right.
they do become targets for
Okay.
some type of damage here.
Yeah, that makes sense. So back in the day, when there weren't as many toxins, you had to be really
Right.
susceptible in order for you to get triggered. But then now, because we're overloading the body with so many toxins, somebody with just a small amount of the genetic uh, kind of susceptibility would then get hit with autism because they're so overloaded with toxins,
Correct.
mixed with some sort of ignition source, which is like acetaminophen.
Like
Um,
acetaminophen, exactly. I mean,
okay.
valproate is another one besides acetaminophen. I think that I can't remember what type of, it might be an epilepsy medicine, or there's some type of medicine. It's called
So
valproate. I need to Google that. Sorry.
So when they came out yesterday and said it's the Tylenol, um, basically, I mean, that's what the takeaway that a lot of people are hearing is it's the
Right.
Tylenol. I guess I understand this, that why they would pinpoint that rather than like vaccines or other toxins, because if it's the ignition, so if the toxins are the fuel, you've got the genetics, so you're like dry, you tinder, right? You're ready
Right.
to ignite, just genetically, and then you take the ignition, or I mean the fuel, and you've got all the toxins, which is basically pouring the fuel all over. You need the ignition. And
Right.
if you don't have the ignition, you could pour the fuel all over the the dry wood. You could pour it all over, but you're still not going to end up with a fire
Right.
without the ignition. So you
Right.
think that yesterday what they were doing was like, let's just pinpoint the ignition right now, the thing that ignites it, because it's going to be a lot harder to tackle the toxins. There's just so many, and they're all over the place.
It would be nice if there was an easy fix to all of this. You know, as a whole, we're not just talking about autism. We're talking about a chronic disease epidemic of autoimmune disorders, of neurodevelopmental disorders, of just plain old sick kids too.
Mhm.
And so, I think that it would be nice. And the whole acetaminophen question is, hey, can we take care of a significant portion of these children just by changing our behavior? They were highlighting pregnancy. I would contend that the neonatal period is probably worse exposure to period than the prenatal period.
Okay.
I've seen the evidence. I really see, the mom during pregnancy does have intact pathways to detoxify Tylenol, so the developing fetus doesn't get as much or doesn't get exposed to as much. So the neonatal period is worse, but it's a more complex issue, and I think that perhaps what they were looking for was the low hanging fruit, which would be acetaminophen.
Well, it's like fireworks in a dry forest. Just
Right.
don't bring fireworks or don't light campfires or don't light barbecues. I mean, that's what they tell us when it's dry season, right?
Mhm.
And everything's primed for ignition for the fire.
Right.
So the easiest thing to tell the public, right, is don't light fires in the forest. Don't bring a lighter, don't let off fireworks, just don't do that part. Yes, there's all these other issues. Yes, we need to
Right.
get we have a drought. Yes, we need to clear the dry brush. Yes, there's all that. Sure, we could do all that too, but just don't bring the damn lighter into the forest, and we won't have the chances of lighting on fires way lower if we just don't light
Right.
fires in the forest. So it sounds to me like the acetaminophen is the bringing the lighter into the forest. Just don't for now. Like, yes, we'll
Right.
deal with all the toxins, we'll deal with all the
Right.
dry brush, right? We'll clear the forest. But for now, please don't bring the lighter into the forest. Don't light fires in the forest. Don't let off fireworks in the forest. That's kind of what it
That's
sounds
a
to me.
really great analogy. Exactly. And if I were to pick low-hanging fruit, then acetaminophen would be one of the main targets. I don't want to absolve anybody. It took a long time to make this mess, and we have to clean it all
Yeah.
up, not
Yeah.
just say, okay, here's a quick, easy fix. Now everybody go home.
Right.
No, no. I mean, mercury and aluminum injected into the body directly. I mean, what is that? Who comes up with this stuff? And so it has to be unwound. But I mean, if you are going to start with a target specifically that is related to autism as a syndrome, then I think acetaminophen is a good target, especially like I said, it's prenatal, neonatal, and postnatal. Really, up to 5 years of age is the window of susceptibility.
That's important. I think people should know that. Like, maybe don't
Yeah.
give your kids the baby Tylenol.
Right, right. Or, look at other methods to reduce fever. Look at other paradigms that you can look at. I mean, if a low grade scares you, let's do some research and
Yeah.
figure out what the body is actually doing when it runs a low grade fever. The fact that most bacteria that are causing these infections are highly temperature sensitive, and fever actually kills off the infection.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
look at educating the people about what fevers are, about when to treat a fever, about how to treat a fever, about when not to treat a fever, and then start from that basis.
Yeah. I try not to treat low grade fevers in myself personally. I let it burn. I
Well,
let it burn.
maybe it's not pleasant, but it is
It's doing
it is
something. It's
really
doing a job.
it is doing a job. Absolutely. If you listen to a lot of the work and read a lot of the work of Dr. Suzanne Humphrey, she's always talking about acetaminophen and about how it smacks down the body's defenses when the body is trying to do its work.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were a couple of times in my young life when I was real young that I had really, really high fevers because I had, I think when I had the mumps or the measles, one of those, because I got all of
Right,
those things
right.
back in the day. I didn't get the vaccines because I had all the diseases. By the time they
Yeah.
wanted to vaccinate me, there was no need. I was already naturally
Mhm.
vaccinated. But I do remember getting my grandmother telling me stories of me having like 105, and they had to just like dunk me in an ice bath. I mean, they just like
Right.
threw me in the ice water right then and there to
It
try to
worked.
cool me down. Yeah, I mean,
It worked.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, they had other things that they had to do. If they it certainly didn't have any baby Tylenol on hand. That I don't even know if
Well,
that
it's awfully convenient, but I think that you need to look at the convenience cost, as well
right.
as the benefit. Acetaminophen is an interesting molecule because it will knock down the fever, but it does not prevent inflammation. It is not anti-inflammatory. And so
Mm,
in looking at that, what it does is it resets the part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is the body's thermostat, and it resets it to a lower temperature. But all the inflammatory processes, a lot of them that are causing discomfort, are still going on. And
yeah.
so, I mean, I would be very, very selective, and cool baths. Oh my goodness. If you're on fire, if you're hot, if you can put if your child can tolerate an ice bath or a very, very cool water bath, it works. It
Yeah.
does work, and it's a natural remedy, and it's not a chemical toxin that the body has to detoxify.
I'll have to, see how my mom used to treat me as a kid because she's Asian, so
Mhm.
Asian people tended to have different
Right,
methods, more natural methods, and so it'd be interesting to see how China, how the Asian world and the
right,
rates of autism on the Asian world. I'd be curious to see if those are lower because they tend to use more natural remedies. Not all the time. I mean, certainly
right,
Asian cultures do believe in Western, they believe in science.
right.
But they still it's a combination. They're not quick to typically, I mean, at least in my experience and the people I know in my family, they're not quick to run to science and Western medication. Instead, they'll try other things first before turning to that. So, I wonder if the rates are lower in societies with those cultures.
I do know that, one of the countries that quintessentially does not use acetaminophen is Cuba. And really, I think that the Cuban government has decided that the cost of acetaminophen is too high to invest in its country. And the autism rates are about 1 in 2,500.
So
And,
really low.
they still get vaccinated. I'm not aware of the vaccination schedule. I'm a little ignorant of that, and I need to do my homework.
But they make their own vaccines. They do it
They,
differently. Like their
they
COVID
do make
vaccine
their
was
own
totally
vaccine.
different.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of a lot of the a lot of the more isolated countries like Cuba did make their own technologies, make their own vaccines. The RNA platform is the mRNA platform for the COVID shot was more of a Western world phenomenon, although it was distributed then in places like India and even PRC. So.
People have been bringing up Cuba. They've been talking about Cuba and saying, "Oh,
Mhm.
this is like the ignorance of people." Saying, "Oh, well, that's because Cuba doesn't have a good medical. They don't have good doctors. They don't have good medical community, and so they're not tracking autism." I mean, the Cubans are some of the best doctors in the world. That's like their main export, right? Is like doctors. I mean, they're any sort of crises around the world, and the Cubans are flying out to. I mean, they were like the first on the ground in Italy during COVID to help
I
out.
think that people need to take another look. I mean, it's so easy if your purpose is to make an argument, then you get your factoid and stop. You are missing the whole picture.
Yeah.
Let's have our purpose be to learn. You know, Tylenol was new to me. I'm late to the party. I am absolutely late to the party with Tylenol. I didn't even really know about it until like 2022, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, but I really, I think we need to have a thirst for learning. I'm fortunate. I grew up in a family that I had parents who encouraged me about inquiry, about learning, about and the wonder of God's creation. And so to me, it's much, much easier to have an open question and assimilate that information. People ask me, "Oh, are you throwing out vaccines?" No, absolutely not. Again, let's talk about the autism triangle.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm not. My son was vaccine injured. I know when it happens. I saw it happen. I know the different factors. And now that I know about acetaminophen, I know more about what
Yeah.
happened then. But yeah, it's very easy. I did an interview on News Nation, and I followed somebody who was talking about better diagnosing of autism. I'm like, you can't really miss when you have low functioning autism, which is about 40% of the entire autism spectrum. It's very, very hard to miss.
Yeah. What is it? I'm glad you brought up this, people having a lack of questioning, and it does seem the strangest thing about all of this and about this announcement is there just seems to be a huge faction of doctors and scientists who wanna I mean, I can't even understand their reasoning, but it's almost like they don't want to find the cause of au I mean, they're kind of like their attitude is almost just, "Oh, phooey," you know, "We don't know what causes autism," and it's like, "Okay, so then shouldn't we figure it out?" And they're almost like, "No, we don't know, and we don't know, and we're not going to know, and you're a conspiracy theorist trying to find out." I mean, it's what in the world is up with that line of thinking?
Well, I think there's so much cognitive dissonance there, and one of the things that I learned early on, I have such a great mentor in Dr. Liz Mumper, and she is a practitioner. She's semi-retired now. She used to practice medicine near Charlottesville, Virginia, and she said one of the most difficult things that she had to come up against was the fact that she had caused children to get autism. And that was really very, very difficult for her. But she came to the conclusion when she saw a young African American male child after the MMR regress into autism just so quickly and so distinctly after the MMR vaccine, she said, I couldn't deny it. But
Yeah.
the fact is that I had to really realize the responsibility that I had taken in not knowing that. And the amount of guilt, shame, and all that I had to work through. I really think that if you just take a broad brush and say, oh, well, they don't know what causes autism, and then you move on and, like eat your sandwich or whatever,
Yeah.
that might be the emotionally safe route. But I think that so many of these practitioners do need to let themselves be able to say, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I caused some damage, you know, and then be able to stop
Yeah.
causing the damage. I mean, when you put the blinders on, you can expect to learn. You can expect to do it better. But I think that so many of them that there's so much cognitive dissonance there that they just want to shut it out.
I just don't understand this reaction of, "Oh, we don't know what causes autism," and it's like, and they're and we don't need to know, it's just
Right.
something that happens and everybody just needs to deal with it. I mean, that just seems to be the reaction, which is just so bizarre to me and really, really
Mhm.
unfortunate because it is, until people can actually come to, "Hey, we actually do need to find what is causing this," and,
Right.
you know, we need to figure this out. I think a better analogy, I mean, I think the dry forest is a good analogy, but I think it's more like a dry forest and with the vaccines or with toxins, like you said, pesticides, and, the list is long with all the toxins that we have.
Right.
There's chemicals that they're spraying into the air, there's the water we're drinking, the food we're eating, what we're injecting into our bodies, other medications. Who knows all these other things that our body's having a difficult time detoxing from.
Right.
It's almost like as if we had an oil spill in the forest and but on purpose, like they're like pouring gasoline on the forest, uh, and, and it's like, okay, yes, the gasoline is them pouring gasoline all over the forest is absolutely going to cause a fire. It's gonna be
Right.
a major contributing factor. If we didn't have the gasoline poured all over the forest, the forest has a tendency to dry out, so there's always gonna have that genetic factor, the natural
Right.
factor of the forest. But
That's
then
exactly
pouring gasoline all over it certainly doesn't help. But still, right now, just for now, there is gasoline all over the forest. The forest has the natural inclination to light on fire because it's dry. Don't bring a lighter. Don't light a fire, don't set off fireworks,
right.
and that
Right.
would be the Tylenol. And so that's I think and
Exactly.
yes, we will
That's
get
so
them to
good.
stop pouring gasoline all over the forest, like, we need to
We
get to that.
we need to stop tempting fate with what we're doing. We really, and Kim, that's beautiful. I mean, I love the whole analogy because it is really on purpose. People know that by design, we are becoming more and more toxic from a chemical perspective. And so, but you can't only, that's not sustainable. And I think that's one of the reasons why, things like the epidemic of chronic diseases, including autism, are raging out of control. It's ridiculous to have a 76.4% of the population of the United States has at least one chronic condition. That is not sustainable.
Right. That is not. And that is one thing also to know is that these toxins are causing not just brain developmental issues, but of course, how many other issues are we dealing with because our bodies cannot detoxify fast enough all the stuff that
Hmm.
they're pumping into us in a variety of different ways. Very interesting. I'm so much clearer now on this. Thank you for this conversation and for clarifying. I think everybody watching is also a lot more clear on this and understanding that this isn't just because they came out saying that it's acetaminophen or Tylenol. That doesn't mean it's not all this other stuff too. It's all of it, the combination of it, and and people maybe should even consider getting tested to find out their genetic susceptibility. How even just for their own selves, even if, I'm not an autistic adult, but I should know how hard it is for my body to detoxify so I know whether or not I should stay away from toxins and be more vigilant on eating organic and, and what
Right.
cleaning products I use in my house or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
anything when it comes to
Hmm.
toxins that I'm allowing myself to be around.
I think that knowledge is power. I think that people knowing more about themselves, their genetic makeup, I think people knowing more about what they're putting in their bodies, and what their lifestyle practices lead to, it makes such a huge difference. And then putting discipline on top of that, it does. It's so much power to be able to know these things, to actually put them into practice. And again, I'm over the moon because of the announcement and the following press conference yesterday, because so much was exposed and so much was brought to light. But really, the take-home message is, I love it. I love seeing it. Now let's carry it out. Let's reduce the toxic load. Let's look at key stressors like Tylenol, or the generic acetaminophen, or what they call it in the UK and Europe as paracetamol. Um, let's look at these things and let's put it into practice. It would be so nice if we saw measurable decrease in the autism epidemic, measurable decrease in the chronic disease epidemic over the next few years.
Yeah, that would be cool. It'd be great if we could pinpoint and then see that decrease. That would be really really great. Dr. Brian Hooker, thank you so much for being here. Where should we have a link down below to Children's Health Defense,
Right.
um, and to your
Also, you
Twitter
can
account.
perfect. Twitter, Instagram's the same, and then just look for Brian Hooker, PhD, on Facebook, and watch my show on CHD TV, Doctors and Scientists, every Friday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.